I swear, the sight of that raw, jagged concrete where my great-grandfather's iron gate used to be almost made me physically ill. They didn't just remove it, they ripped it out like a rotten tooth, leaving a gaping, ugly wound on my property. My blood ran cold, then boiled. I swear, the sight of that raw, jagged concrete where my great-grandfather's iron gate used to be almost made me physically ill. They didn't just remove it, they ripped it out like a rotten tooth, leaving a gaping, ugly wound on my property. My blood ran cold, then boiled. See, my name's Arthur Finn. I'm 52, and well, I used to be a literature professor. Retired sounds nicer, but let's just say the quiet life called me back home. And home means this house. This beautiful old house built by my great-grandfather, right here in what's now known as Heritage Hills. It's not just a house, it's a living library packed with generations of books, letters, and stories. My grandfather, he turned it into this unofficial cultural hub back in the day. People would come by, borrow books, talk history, argue philosophy. It was a real community cornerstone. When he passed, I inherited it all. The house, the books, the legacy, and that iron gate, the one they just ripped out, that was a piece of that legacy too. My great-grandfather had it custom forged, every scroll and leaf a testament to his pride in this place. It wasn't just a gate, it was the entry point to our family's story, a silent sentinel that had stood there for almost a century. Coming back here, it was about more than just moving into a new place. It was about preserving something real, something that mattered. I always pictured myself here, surrounded by these books, maybe writing my own. A quiet life, full of history and peace. That's all I wanted. This whole mess, it really started when I decided to move back into my grandfather's old house in Heritage Hills. Most folks my age, they're chasing the next big city, the next big thing. Me, I was tired of it. After 30 years of teaching literature buried in dusty academic journals and campus politics, the quiet solitude of this place, the history humming in its old timber, it just called to me. I wanted to be surrounded by stories, not deadlines. The house itself, it's not some McMansion. It's a proper old craftsman built by my great-grandfather back in 1910. It's got these deep, welcoming eaves and a big front porch that just begs for a rocking chair and a good book. But the real heart of it, for me anyway, was the library. Not just a room, but a whole wing, purpose-built with floor-to-ceiling shelves, filled with every book my family had ever owned, ever loved, ever read. It was my grandfather's passion, then my father's, and now mine. It was a tangible link to generations of Finns, each spine a whispered memory. And that iron gate, the one they ripped out, it was the original, hand-forged by a local blacksmith who was a friend of my great-grandfather. It wasn't just a gate, it was the entry point to our family's story, a piece of living history. It always felt like a silent guardian, a symbol of everything that made this place ours. When I first moved in, the HOA seemed like a minor inconvenience, just another layer of bureaucracy I'd have to navigate. I figured a few forms, maybe a polite conversation about my overgrown hedges, and that would be it. I was so incredibly wrong. The first sign that something was off, beyond the usual HOA nitpicking, came about a month after I moved in. I got a notice tucked into my mailbox about aesthetic inconsistencies. It was from the Heritage Hills HOA, signed by this new president, Veronica Shaw. I hadn't even met her yet. The letter, all formal and slightly passive-aggressive, stated that my wrought iron fence, the beautiful century-old one, didn't align with the modern, streamlined vision of Heritage Hills. It went on to say it needed to be replaced with something more suitable, like vinyl or treated lumber, and gave me 30 days to comply. I remember chuckling, actually. I figured it was just some overzealous new blood, trying to make their mark. I wrote a polite letter back, explaining the historical significance of the gate, mentioning how it was actually older than the HOA itself, and politely declining to replace a perfectly good, historical fixture with something that looked like it belonged on a suburban tract home. I thought that would be the end of it. Oh, how naive I was. That was just the opening salvo in what would become a full-blown war over a piece of my family's legacy. My polite letter, the one I thought would resolve everything, just seemed to pour gasoline on the fire. A week later, another notice arrived, this time with a final warning and an added threat of fines. Then came the phone calls, not from Veronica herself, but from a breathless, overly polite assistant at the HOA office, reminding me daily about the impending deadline and the escalating penalties. It was like they were trying to wear me down with bureaucracy. I ignored them. Honestly, what else could I do? It was a ridiculous demand. But then things got personal. My library, you see, it has these beautiful antique stained glass windows depicting scenes from classic literature. They're unique, a real conversation piece. One morning, I woke up to find a notice taped directly to the largest of these windows, a vibrant depiction of Don Quixote, declaring it a visual obstruction and requiring its modification or removal. The absurdity of it was infuriating. They were literally attacking the soul of my house, the very things that made it special. I called the HOA office, and this time Veronica herself answered. Her voice was pure silk, dripping with artificial sweetness. She explained very slowly, as if I were a child, that while she appreciated the charm of my quirky windows, they simply didn't fit the unified aesthetic of Heritage Hills. She even suggested with a little laugh that I could replace them with something more appropriate, perhaps a nice frosted glass for privacy. It was a deliberate jab, a way to belittle my home, my taste, my history. Then, the veiled threats started. I'd find myself at the grocery store, and a neighbor, one I'd known for years, would suddenly avoid eye contact. Little whispers would reach me, rumors about my uncooperative nature and how I was bringing down property values. It felt like a subtle, insidious campaign of social ostracism. They were trying to isolate me, to make me feel like an outsider in my own community. And the fence notices? They kept coming, escalating from warnings to actual fines. First it was $50, then $100, then $200, each one stapled right to the wooden post of my mailbox for all the world to see. It was a calculated, petty harassment designed to chip away at my patience and my wallet. I still refused to engage, thinking that if I just held firm, they'd eventually move on to some other perceived infraction. I underestimated Veronica Shaw, and I definitely underestimated her capacity for vindictiveness. They weren't just after offense, they were after control, and my house, with its history and its defiance, was the last bastion of individuality in their perfectly manicured little kingdom. I'm not one for confrontation, never have been. My instinct is always to find the logical, reasonable path. So after the fines started piling up and the subtle jabs from the HOA became less subtle, I decided to play by their rules, at least initially. I figured if I showed them I was willing to engage, willing to be reasonable, maybe they'd back off. First, I requested a formal hearing with the HOA board. I prepared a meticulous presentation, historical photos of the gate and the house, architectural diagrams, even a few excerpts from local history books detailing the craftsmanship in the area during my great-grandfather's time. I even brought a small laminated plaque from the Historical Society recognizing the house as one of the oldest standing structures in the original Finn's Hamlet. I wanted to show them this wasn't just my preference, it was about preserving a piece of the community's heritage. I sat there in a sterile meeting room at the community center across a polished table from Veronica Shaw and two other board members. Veronica, of course, was front and center, a perfectly coiffed, unblinking smile plastered on her face. I went through my presentation, calm and articulate, outlining why the gate was historically significant and why their demand was baseless. I even offered a compromise. I'd repaint the gate, perhaps, or reinforce it if they had structural concerns. Anything but replace it. Veronica listened, nodding occasionally, but her eyes were cold, almost bored. When I finished, she steepled her fingers, looked at the other two board members who just sat there like statues, and then turned back to me. "Mr. Finn," she began, her voice still that unnervingly smooth purr, "we appreciate your passion for nostalgia, truly. But Heritage Hills is a modern community. We have standards, we have rules. Your gate, frankly, doesn't fit the vision we have for this neighborhood." She then launched into a pre-rehearsed spiel about property values, community cohesion, and how one rogue element could disrupt the entire aesthetic. She didn't address a single one of my historical points. It was like talking to a brick wall coated in Teflon. They just kept repeating standards and vision until the words lost all meaning. They unanimously denied my appeal, of course. Next, I tried reaching out to a few of the older residents, people who had lived in Heritage Hills for decades, long before Veronica Shaw's reign. I knew some of them appreciated the older homes, the history. I spoke to Mrs. Henderson, a sweet elderly woman who had known my grandparents. She seemed sympathetic, but her voice dropped to a whisper. "Arthur, dear," she said, wringing her hands. "Veronica, she's very persuasive and very determined. People don't want trouble." It was clear she was intimidated. I even consulted a local attorney, a friend of a friend. He specialized in real estate law, but he sighed when I mentioned HOA dispute. He told me, "Arthur, HOAs have a lot of power. They write the rules, they enforce them, and they can bleed you dry with legal fees. Unless you have a really solid loophole, you're probably better off just complying." I left his office feeling defeated, but not broken, just utterly frustrated. It wasn't about the money for the fines anymore, or even just the gate. It was about principle. It was about them trying to erase my family's history, my identity, and impose their bland, soulless vision on my home. Their dismissive arrogance, their blatant disregard for anything beyond their own petty rules, just solidified my resolve. I knew then that peaceful resolution wasn't an option. They wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted, and I wasn't about to let them have it. After they tore out my gate and the fines started piling up, I figured it was time to play by their rules, at least for a minute. I mean, I'm a literature professor, not some bare-knuckle brawler, so I dug out the HOA's official grievance procedure from their website, a 20-page monstrosity written in prose so dense it made Faulkner look breezy. I highlighted every section, cross-referenced every clause, and spent 3 nights drafting a formal appeal. It was a masterpiece of polite indignation, citing specific articles of their own bylaws that, in my humble opinion, protected existing structures, especially those predating the current HOA. I submitted it in person, hand-delivering it to the HOA office. This was a place, by the way, that looked more like a sterile dentist's waiting room than the hub of a community. The woman at the front desk, a perpetually harried-looking type named Brenda, barely made eye contact. She just stamped my copy, slid it back, and told me, "The board will review it at their next quarterly meeting. You'll be notified." Quarterly? That was 3 months away. And my gate was already gone. I asked about the urgency, about the ongoing fines, and she just shrugged, gave me a tight, practiced smile, and said, "Procedure, Mr. Finn." A few weeks later, I even tried calling Veronica Shaw, directly. I thought maybe if I could just talk to her, explain the historical context, the sentimental value, professor to human being. She actually picked up, which surprised me. I started, very calmly, to lay out my case. I talked about how the gate was more than just a piece of metal, how it connected my house to the very fabric of Heritage Hill's past. She listened, patiently at first, then I could hear a subtle shift in her tone. It was like she was trying to sound empathetic, but failing spectacularly. She cut me off mid-sentence, said something about progress and uniformity, and then, with a little sigh that was clearly meant to convey my utter unreasonableness, she declared, "Mr. Finn, your historical sentimentalism simply isn't compatible with the vision we have for a modern, desirable community. We have standards. You need to meet them. This conversation is over." She hung up before I could even respond. It was a cold, dismissive click that echoed in my ear. It wasn't just a rejection, it was an active dismissal of everything I valued, everything my house represented. It reinforced that this wasn't about rules. Not really, it was about her vision, her control, and it lit a slow, burning fuse inside me. My polite appeals were just being laughed at. They wanted me to roll over, to become just another identical, perfectly bland house in their perfectly bland neighborhood. That's when I realized peaceful wasn't going to cut it. Okay, so my attempts at being reasonable, at playing the good academic, clearly weren't working. They'd taken my gate, they were piling on the fines, and Veronica Shaw had made it abundantly clear she wasn't interested in anything but absolute control. That's when I decided to really lean into my strengths. I mean, what's a literature professor good for if not digging through dusty old records? My grandfather, God bless him, was a pack rat, but a methodical pack rat. He kept everything meticulously organized in a small hidden room behind the library's false wall, a secret nook only revealed by a loose floorboard in front of a specific Shakespeare first edition. It was a place I hadn't really explored since I was a kid, a place of mystery and forgotten treasures. I spent days in there, sifting through ancient bank statements, faded photographs, even my great-grandmother's recipe cards. I was looking for anything that might give me leverage, some old deed, a forgotten easement, anything that could challenge the HOA's claims. Most of it was charming family history, but then tucked away in a brittle leather-bound portfolio labeled Finn Ancestry, legal, I found it. A thick stack of documents, yellowed with age, brittle to the touch, and smelling faintly of old paper and dust. There were original blueprints of the house looking exactly as it did now, hand-drawn with exquisite detail. And then, nestled among them, a series of official-looking letters and legal opinions from the early 1900s. My heart started thumping when I saw the heading on one of the documents, City Council Resolution Number 47, Re, designation of Finn's Landing Private Enclave. Finn's Landing? I remembered my grandfather mentioning something about the original name of this area, long before Heritage Hills was dreamt up by some marketing consultant. But private enclave? I skimmed through the archaic legal language, my eyes widening with each sentence. It turns out my great-grandfather, a rather formidable gentleman by all accounts, along with a few other prominent families back in the day, had actually petitioned the city. They didn't want their unique, sprawling properties, each with its own distinct character, to be swallowed up by the rapid suburbanization that was already starting to creep in. And they'd won. The resolution, dated 1912, officially declared Finn's Landing, which covered my property and what were now several of the HOA's common areas, a designated private enclave. It essentially granted these specific parcels a special protected status. exempting them from future zoning changes, new community ordinances, and, critically, from the jurisdiction of any future homeowners associations. It even had clauses about maintaining original architectural integrity and historical continuity. It was basically a legal shield, decades old, built right into the land itself. The kicker? There was a handwritten note from my great-grandfather clipped to the resolution, faded ink on brittle paper. "Keep this quiet, let them think they have power, the right time will come." He had deliberately buried this, knowing that the less obvious this protection was, the more potent it would be when needed. The HOA hadn't just ignored this, it looked like it had been deliberately scrubbed from any public record associated with the current Heritage Hills development. Veronica Shaw, with her obsession for modernization and uniformity, had no idea she was trying to flatten a legally protected historical monument. My quiet, scholarly life had just become the front line in a century-old battle for property rights. It wasn't just my gate anymore, it was my entire existence here, and the legacy of my family that was at stake, and suddenly the game had changed. That moment, sitting there in the dusty secret room, holding those brittle papers, I felt a calm settle over me that hadn't been there in weeks. The anger was still there, sure, but it was now a cold, directed energy, not that sputtering frustration. Veronica Shaw wanted a war? Fine, she just didn't know she'd started it on my battlefield with my rules. My plan started to form almost immediately, not with grand gestures, but with methodical precision, just like a good research project. First things first, verification. I couldn't just wave some old papers around, I needed official, contemporary confirmation. I spent the next week practically living at the county archives, buried in microfiche and oversized ledgers. It took some doing, navigating the labyrinthine municipal records from 100 years ago, but there it was. City Council Resolution, number 47, Volume D, page 112. The resolution was legitimate. The Finns Landing private enclave was real. And crucially, the exemptions from future HOA jurisdiction were ironclad. It was buried, sure, but it wasn't erased. Someone had just hoped it would stay forgotten. Next, I needed to make sure I wasn't just right, but that I could prove they were wrong, specifically Veronica Shaw. I started cross-referencing HOA meeting minutes with property records. I looked for any mention of the historical status of my property or any property in the old Finns Landing area. Nothing. It was like those records had been deliberately bypassed or more likely conveniently overlooked during the establishment of Heritage Hills HOA. This omission, combined with their aggressive tactics against my historically protected property, started to look less like an oversight and more like a deliberate act of suppression. My plan wasn't just about protecting my house, it was about exposing the arrogance and perhaps even the deceit at the heart of this HOA. Veronica had thrived on secrecy and intimidation. My counterattack would be built on transparency and undeniable fact. I decided the best place to drop this bombshell wouldn't be some quiet legal meeting or a dusty courtroom, but at the next HOA general meeting. That's where the power lay in public opinion. I didn't want to just win, I wanted to reveal. I wanted every resident of Heritage Hills to see exactly what kind of leadership they had. So I started drafting a presentation. Not a dry academic lecture, but a narrative. A story, really, one that started with the beautiful, hand-forged gate and ended with a shocking historical revelation that completely undermined the HOA's authority. I'd bring copies of the original resolution, magnified for clarity, and even some old photographs of Finns Landing that showed its distinct character. And I even reached out to a few of the older residents, the ones who had lived here before Veronica Shaw and her modern vision took over. I subtly asked them if they remembered anything about Finns Landing, or any special properties in the area. Most were vague, but one old woman, Mrs. Gable, remembered her grandmother, talking about how the Finn house was different, that they couldn't touch it. It was enough to confirm that the memory, however faint, still existed in the community's collective consciousness. I wasn't just fighting for myself, I was fighting for a piece of shared local history, and I was going to do it publicly, with all the careful precision of a literary scholar dissecting a text. The date of the annual HOA meeting had been circled on my calendar for weeks, practically glowing. I'd done my homework, meticulously organized every document, and even rehearsed my presentation, imagining Veronica Shaw's smug face contorting as the truth hit her. I arrived early, carrying a heavy leather briefcase that probably looked like it contained a small arsenal of legal textbooks, which, in a way, it did. The community hall was buzzing, a typical mix of retirees gossiping and younger couples trying to look engaged. Veronica, as always, was holding court near the podium, looking impossibly polished in a sharp business suit, her smile a little too wide, a little too fixed. The meeting started with the usual tedious reports, landscaping budgets, community events, a dry recitation of rules. My turn came during new business and member concerns. Veronica announced my name with a saccharine sweetness that grated on my nerves. "Mr. Finn has requested time to discuss a personal matter," she said, practically winking at the audience as if to say, "Here we go, the crazy old professor again." I walked to the podium, placed my briefcase on the stand, and took a deep breath. I didn't yell, didn't accuse. I spoke calmly, slowly, letting each word land. "Good evening, neighbors. I'm here tonight not about a personal matter, but about the very foundations of our community and how they might have been misinterpreted." I saw a few people shift, intrigued. Veronica's smile faltered just a touch. "I started by talking about my house, not as a point of contention, but as a piece of history. I showed them old photos, blown up on a projector screen, of my great-grandfather standing by the original Iron Gate, and even an early painting of the Finn's Landing area showing the distinct character of the original homesteads. Then I pulled out the enlarged copies of City Council Resolution Number 47. This document," I said, holding it up, "dated 1912, isn't just a piece of history. It's a legally binding resolution, one that established this area, specifically the properties that formed Finn's Landing, as a private enclave. An enclave," I emphasized, looking directly at Veronica, "exempt from the jurisdiction of any future homeowners associations." A ripple of murmuring went through the room. Veronica's face was a mask of disbelief, then a flicker of genuine panic. "Mr. Finn," she interrupted, her voice suddenly sharp, "this is absurd. Those are ancient papers. They have no bearing on—" "On the contrary, Ms. Shaw," I cut her off, my voice gaining a quiet force, "they have every bearing. This resolution was never rescinded. It was simply forgotten, or perhaps conveniently ignored." I then projected the official county archivist's stamp and signature, verifying the document's authenticity and its current legal standing. "I've confirmed this with the county archives, and to ensure complete transparency, I've invited Mr. Harrison, the senior archivist, and Dr. Elena Ramirez, a local historian specializing in early 20th century municipal law, to join us tonight." Just then, the back door of the hall opened, and Mr. Harrison, a thin man in a tweed jacket, and Dr. Ramirez, a sharp-eyed woman with a stack of files, walked in. Their presence alone, their quiet, authoritative nod to my words, instantly lent crushing credibility to my claims. Veronica looked like she'd been hit by a truck. The murmuring in the room escalated into outright whispers, then angry exclamations. People were pulling out their phones, taking pictures of the projected resolution. My counterattack wasn't just about my gate, it was about exposing the decades-long lie they'd been living under, a lie built on the deliberate suppression of their own history. The hall erupted. It wasn't just murmuring anymore, it was a confused, angry roar. People were talking over each other, demanding answers. A private enclave? What does that even mean? We've been paying dues for nothing? Is this real? Veronica Shaw, her face pale, tried to regain control, pounding the gavel, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. "Order, order, everyone, this is a fabrication. Mr. Finn is attempting to mislead you." But I wasn't done. I lowered my voice, making everyone lean in, straining to hear over the din. "It means," I said, my gaze sweeping across the stunned faces, "that the very foundation of this HOA's authority over specific properties, including mine, is non-existent. It means every fine they levied against me for my historical gate was illegal. And it means every demand they made about my windows, about modernizing my home, was based on a power they never possessed." And then I pulled out the file containing the copies of the fines, the letters, even the estimate I'd gotten to replace the, now gone, Iron Gate with some flimsy vinyl monstrosity. I projected a blow-up of one of the earlier notices, the one about the aesthetic inconsistencies of my gate, with Veronica's signature clearly visible. "These are not just ancient papers, Ms. Shaw. These are the proof that your organization, under your leadership, has been operating outside its legal bounds, at least where my property is concerned, and I suspect for others too." Mr. Harrison, the archivist, stepped forward then, his voice quiet but carrying surprising authority. "Mr. Finn's findings are accurate. City Council Resolution 47 is indeed a valid, unrescinded document on file with the county. It's a rare but legitimate case of a historical property designation that predates most modern suburban planning. Its existence should have been disclosed during any formation of subsequent governing bodies like an HOA." Dr. Ramirez added, "In essence, Mr. Finn's property, as part of the original Finn's Landing, never truly fell under the jurisdiction of the Heritage Hills HOA. Any enforcement actions against it are, by definition, null and void." That was the nail in the coffin. A group of neighbors, some of whom had given me the cold shoulder for weeks, started shouting at Veronica. "You knew about this, didn't you? Why was this hidden? What else have you been overlooking?" Her carefully constructed facade cracked. She stammered, tried to blame oversight and outdated records, but it was too late. The collective trust, already thin for an HOA, had shattered. People were pulling out their phones, not just to take pictures, but to record the escalating chaos. I even saw one woman, Martha Jenkins, a notorious busybody who always sided with Veronica, openly weeping in the third row, probably realizing her own property might have some hidden historical quirk the HOA had ignored. The public humiliation was complete. Veronica Shaw, usually so composed, looked utterly destroyed, her perfect suit now looking like a cheap costume. Her reign of prestige and uniformity had just collapsed into a public spectacle of deceit and incompetence. The next few days were a blur of phone calls, emergency meetings, and frantic legal consultations within the HOA. For me, it was a quiet satisfaction. The fines stopped, of course, not a single one arrived after that meeting. My phone, which had previously been buzzing with automated reminders, went silent. It was almost eerie. The ripple effect, though, was anything but quiet. Neighbors, the ones who had previously crossed the street to avoid me, were now stopping by with casseroles and apologies. Arthur, we had no idea. That Veronica, we always knew she was a piece of work. It was a sudden, overwhelming outpouring of support, laced with a healthy dose of shared indignation. They started talking about the other aesthetic improvements Veronica had pushed through, new expensive landscaping companies, mandatory uniform mailboxes that cost a fortune, and suddenly everyone was questioning everything. Veronica Shaw? Her reign came to an abrupt, unceremonious end. The HOA bylaws, once her shield, became her undoing. The community, armed with the truth about the Finn's Landing enclave, demanded her immediate resignation. There was talk of legal action against her personally, not just for the illegal fines against me, but for the wider breach of fiduciary duty to the entire community. She left Heritage Hills within weeks, a shadow of her former imperious self, her modern vision crumbling behind her. The precise details of her departure were kept quiet by the remaining shell-shocked board members, but the rumor mill had it she was facing a rather unpleasant combination of personal lawsuits and a complete loss of professional standing. Frankly, she deserved every bit of it. Life slowly returned to its quiet rhythm. The HOA, under new, more transparent leadership, officially acknowledged the historical designation of my property. They issued a formal written apology, which I promptly framed and hung in my study right next to a first edition of Don Quixote. The concrete where my gate used to be. The HOA, chastened and eager to make amends, offered to install a new, historically accurate gate. But I declined. I wanted my gate back. It took some time and a lot of searching, but I found the original blacksmith's family still in the area. They had my great-grandfather's design sketches, and with some old-world skill, they forged a new, identical iron gate, a perfect replica of the one that had stood there for over a century. Installing it, watching those intricate scrolls swing into place, felt like history healing itself. My house, my library, they were more than just a home now. They were a symbol, not just for me, but for some of the other older residents too. We started a small, informal Heritage Keepers group dedicated to researching and protecting other overlooked historical elements in our neighborhood. The HOA, now much more cooperative, even offered grants for preservation efforts. My gate, which had been the flashpoint of conflict, became a landmark, a quiet monument to the fact that history, when forgotten, often has a way of asserting itself, sometimes with a delightful, iron-fisted justice. I went back to my books, to my quiet life, but with a new understanding that some stories, the best ones, aren't just found on dusty shelves. They're lived.